How do you explain a hand that is both ghostly and warm to the touch? Beneath the shattered landscapes of the Great War, a different kind of darkness began to take hold. Deep within the front-line trenches, soldiers lived on the razor edge between our world and the next. In the suffocating silence of a dugout, the veil between life and death often seemed dangerously thin. Amidst the relentless thunder of artillery, some men reported encounters that defied every known law of nature. These were the spectral sightings, ghostly figures appearing where no living soul could possibly survive. Out in the scarred waste of no man's land, many claimed to see their fallen comrades rising. In the chaos of the front line, is it possible the veil between life and death simply wore thin? Were these mere hallucinations of the exhausted, or something far more tangible and terrifying, like a radio picking up a signal from a station that should be out of range? Others spoke of chilling premonitions, sudden flashes of certain death that allowed them to escape the impossible. Within the damp earth, tunneling companies felt the presence of unseen entities watching their every move. History often dismisses these accounts as shell shock, the mind's fractured response to the horrors of war. Yet, for those who felt the touch of a phantom, the experience was undeniably, hauntingly real. How could a soldier avoid a fatal blast because a silent voice whispered a timely warning? We must look into the mud-stained records of the past to find the truth behind these stories. These impossible moments suggest that the chaos of battle might have opened doors to another realm. To understand the supernatural, we must first walk through the haunted ruins of the front lines. This is a journey into the heart of the Great War's most enduring and chilling mysteries. To understand these impossible moments, we have to look at the records left behind in the mud. We often dismiss the supernatural as fiction, but for those in the trenches, it was part of reality. These aren't just campfire stories. They are documented in the very diaries that survived the Great War. Why would a soldier risk being called mad by writing these impossible sightings down for history? Canadian historian Tim Cook has dedicated himself to uncovering the hidden truths of these military records. For 20 years, Cook has meticulously studied the intimate diaries, letters, and memoirs of the fallen. He sifts through thousands of pages to find spectral sightings that haunt the margins of history. The men writing these accounts weren't poets, but simple farm hands, factory workers, and laborers. Hardened miners who lived underground suddenly face unexplainable shadows within the darkness of a dugout. From the blood-soaked soil of no man's land, these records offer a chilling glimpse into the unknown. These diaries act as time capsules, buried under layers of heavy trauma and decades of forgotten silence. Amidst the constant thunder of artillery, soldiers sought to make sense of the premonitions they felt coming. If a historian spends 2 decades on this, what haunting details did they find that we've missed? Critics might dismiss these tales as mere shell shock, but the written evidence suggests something far more. Men from tunneling companies recorded vibrations in the earth that had no earthly source to explain them. Every ink-stained page tells a story of survival, fear, and encounters that defy every logical explanation. These accounts were never meant for our eyes, written instead to preserve a sanity slipping away. By treating these memoirs as primary sources, we validate the lived experiences of those who actually served. The archives are filled with spectral sightings that challenge our understanding of what happened in those trenches. And few archives are as haunting as those belonging to the men who dug deep into the earth. To truly understand the Great War, we must listen to the voices speaking from the shadows of history. Who were the men who truly faced the horrors of the Great War in those muddy, haunted trenches? They were not merely soldiers, but ordinary men pulled from the quiet rhythms of their varied civilian lives. Before the chaos of no man's land, many spent their long days tending the soil as humble farm hands. These men understood the earth's cycles and the brutal honesty of laboring under an open, shifting sky. Others left the roaring soot of the city, trading factory floors for the damp cold of a dugout. Their lives were forged in industrial heat, accustomed to the relentless mechanical pulse of the modern machine. From deep within the earth, miners brought a specialized courage that most men could hardly ever imagine. These veterans of the dark formed tunneling companies, carving secret paths beneath the feet of an unsuspecting enemy. Does a life spent underground make a man more or less susceptible to sudden, chilling spectral sightings? For these laborers, the boundary between the physical and the unseen was often as thin as the soil. Their resilience was not just military training, but a deep-seated endurance born from years of manual struggle. They were practical, hard-headed men who dealt in stone, steel, and the heavy weight of the harvest. Yet, even the most grounded factory worker could not ignore the strange premonitions that haunted the front lines. Shell shock tore at their minds, but their diverse backgrounds gave them a unique strength to endure. To these men, the supernatural wasn't a fairy tale, but a strange extension of their harsh, daily reality. Imagine a miner, used to the silence of the deep, hearing something unexplainable within the trench walls. Consider the farm hand, sensitive to the atmosphere, sensing a presence long before the artillery began its roar. Their stories carry weight because they come from people who knew the difference between shadow and substance. They brought the superstitions of the countryside and the grit of the city into the Great War. These diverse backgrounds created a tapestry of belief that survived the most hellish conditions on Earth. Every dugout held men whose previous lives prepared them for the impossible weight of the coming storm. As we look closer at these figures, we see how their civilian identities shaped their ghostly encounters. From the coal seam to the wheat field, their past dictated how they interpreted the Great War's mysteries. They were the backbone of the empire, now standing on the precipice of the truly unknown. While most fought on the surface, some spent their war in a pitch-black world beneath the enemy's feet. But the supernatural didn't just haunt the surface. It followed the men deep into the suffocating dark. Can you imagine the silence of a tunnel, knowing tons of earth are waiting right above you? For these men, the Great War was not fought in trenches, but in narrow passages of clay. These were the tunneling companies, elite units tasked with moving the war directly under the enemy. Far below no man's land, they carved through the earth with rhythmic, quiet precision to avoid detection. Military tunnelers dug deep below the battlefields, carrying massive loads of explosives to destroy enemy strongholds. It was a deadly game of chess played in total darkness, where every sound could mean death. In these damp galleries, the weight of the soil felt like a living thing pressing against them. The air was thin, the flickering candles often failing as oxygen levels plummeted in the narrow depths. Every shovelful of dirt brought them closer to the enemy, or perhaps to a premature earthen grave. How does a man keep his sanity in a tomb he spent months digging for himself? Among these subterranean soldiers was Corporal Albert Davy, a man who knew the darkness intimately. Davy served as a member of the 1st Australian Tunneling Company, operating beneath the scarred landscape. By October 1918, he had become a 2-year veteran of this grueling and silent underground conflict. He had survived the shell shock and the constant threat of cave-ins that broke so many others. But the physical dangers of the Great War were only half of the struggle in those pits. In the isolation of a dugout, the mind begins to play tricks, conjuring spectral sightings from shadows. Strange premonitions often rippled through the ranks, warning of disasters that hadn't even happened yet. The tunnelers listened not just for German picks, but for the whispers of the ghosts they disturbed. Down there, the line between reality and the supernatural became as thin as the tunnel walls. Men spoke of feeling ghostly hands in the dark, guiding them towards safety or away from danger. For Davy, the earth held more than just mud. It held the lingering echoes of the fallen. He understood that some horrors were born of the war, while others were much, much older. The silence of the deep earth could be more deafening than the loudest artillery barrage above. One of these men, Corporal Albert Davy, was about to face a nightmare that didn't come from the enemy. Below the ruins of France, he encountered something that challenged every bit of his hard-earned veteran logic. It was a moment where the history of the Great War collided with something truly inexplicable. The depths were calling, and what they revealed would haunt him for the rest of his life. The descent into the unknown was complete, and the shadows were finally beginning to speak back. While the tunnelers faced the dark, a Canadian soldier named Wilbert awaited an encounter defying nature. The visitor wasn't a cold spirit, but a brother whose touch felt entirely and impossibly alive. Deep within a damp Great War dugout, the air usually carried only the scent of mud. In this cramped space, the boundaries between the living and the dead were about to blur forever. Wilbert sat in the flickering shadows, haunted by memories of a sibling lost to the war. Over 2 long years had passed since his dear brother Steve was officially killed in action. The grief was a heavy weight, much like the sodden earth pressing down upon the trench walls. Suddenly, a familiar figure materialized in the gloom of the dugout, standing right before Will's eyes. Looking up, Will recognized the unmistakable face of his brother Steve standing in the narrow passageway. It was a sight that should have been impossible for any soldier serving on the front lines. Will watched in stunned silence as the spectral sighting of his late brother remained perfectly still. How do you process the sudden touch of someone you saw die over 2 years ago? As the figure reached out, Will braced himself for the icy chill often associated with the dead. Instead of a ghostly cold, Will felt a physical sensation that contradicted every spectral legend. When Steve's hand brushed against him, Will noted with absolute shock that the skin felt remarkably warm. It was like feeling the sun on your face in the middle of a freezing winter blizzard. This wasn't a shivering phantom or a trick of shell shock. This was a warm presence. The warmth radiated through Will's uniform, grounding him in a moment that felt both sacred and terrifying. Was this heat a sign of life, or perhaps a warning of the fire to come? The spectral Steve did not come merely to comfort, but to deliver an urgent and vital message. Breaking the heavy silence, the figure of Steve Bird spoke with a clarity that echoed through the dugout. He commanded his brother to quickly gather his gear and follow him out into the night. Will found himself moving without hesitation, driven by the impossible reality of his brother's physical touch. The Great War produced many mysteries, but few were as intimate or as startling as this reunion. But this wasn't a silent ghost. This apparition had a specific, urgent command for the journey ahead. If Will's story was one of survival, the story of Tommy serves as a chilling counterpoint. Not every vision was a guardian. For Tommy, the visitor was a beckoning toward the final end. Amidst the mud and misery of the Great War, spectral sightings often offered comfort to the weary. But for this young soldier, the apparition appearing in the trenches would lead to a different fate. While hunkered in a dark dugout, Tommy claimed to see a familiar figure through the shifting shadows. He identified the woman as his mother, standing impossibly in the middle of a brutal, active battle. His comrades watched in confusion as he reached out toward the ghost only he could truly see. Was it a symptom of shell shock, or a true premonition visiting from the world beyond? Like a moth drawn to a flame, Tommy was pulled toward the light of a comforting memory. In a move that defied every survival instinct, he reached up and slowly removed his heavy helmet. Abandoning his protection, he stepped out from the safety of the trench into the open killing fields. No man's land awaited him, a scarred landscape where death arrived with a sudden and violent roar. He walked toward the woman with a serene expression, ignoring the chaos erupting all around his position. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the sound of whistling iron overhead. Before his friends could stop him, Tommy had already crossed the threshold into the line of fire. Suddenly, a massive blast consumed the very ground where the young soldier stood in his trance. The explosion was final, ending the life of a man who believed his mother was calling him. Why did he take off his helmet when the danger was at its most extreme peak? Did he truly see his mother, or something far more sinister masquerading as a loved one? He didn't just see her, he followed her directly into the blast that took his life. By 1918, the rules of the Great War were changing, forcing men from the underworld into the light. While individuals faced their own ghosts, the entire machinery of the war was shifting for a massive offensive. A pivotal moment arrived as the Allied breakthroughs finally shattered the long-standing defenses along the Western Front. This decisive period, known as the 100 Days Offensive, forever broke a 4-year stalemate of stagnant trench warfare. What happens when a specialist, used to the shadows, is thrown into the meat grinder of the open field? For the tunneling companies, the subterranean war they knew was rapidly becoming a relic of the past. The silent, claustrophobic world of the dugout was traded for the terrifying exposure of the open no-man's land. Like a deep-sea diver suddenly forced to run a marathon on land, their environment had fundamentally changed. The first Australian tunneling company found themselves reassigned to serve directly with standard infantry units late in the war. These men, once masters of the earth, were now tasked with charging across shell-blasted fields under the sun. Could they sense the war's impending end? Or was the weight of their own mortality finally catching up? The transition was jarring for those who had spent years listening for pickaxes in the dark silence. Instead of underground whispers, they faced the deafening roar of artillery and the chaos of the final push. Spectral sightings and premonitions followed them from the damp tunnels into the blinding glare of the battlefield. The psychological burden of shell shock did not vanish. It simply took on a new, more frantic form. Every step forward across the open ground felt like a gamble against a destiny they had long evaded. The underground war was over, but the ghosts of the trenches still lingered in the minds of the survivors. They moved as ghosts themselves, haunting the very ground they had once tried so hard to undermine. For Albert Davy and his comrades, the sudden transition to infantry felt like a ticking countdown to disaster. As the offensive surged forward, the line between the living and the dead became thinner than ever before. The momentum of the Great War was accelerating, carrying every soldier toward an uncertain and violent conclusion. The 100 Days offensive transformed the landscape, turning static burial grounds into a charging, living mass of men. For the Australian tunnelers, the earth was no longer a shield, but a stage for their final act. Before the ghost appeared, Will Bird was already living in a hell of sleep deprivation and nipping rats. To understand why Will saw what he saw, we must understand his broken mind and exhausted body. This Canadian soldier lived within the mud-soaked walls of the Great War trenches for many agonizing weeks. Life in a dugout offered little protection from the relentless dampness and the ever-present smell of decay. For men like Will, the front lines were a world where silence was rare and safety non-existent. Sleep deprivation is a heavy fog that doesn't just cloud the eyes, but slowly poisons the soul. How long can a human mind stay rational when it has been denied rest for many days? Will Bird struggled to keep his eyes open as the weight of exhaustion pressed down upon his shoulders. In the shadows of the Great War, the line between reality and a waking nightmare began to blur. Hunger was a constant companion, but eating meant fighting for every single morsel of their meager rations. Giant rats scurried through the trenches, growing bold and large on the scraps left behind by soldiers. These vermin did not just target the food. They frequently nipped at the exposed skin of sleeping men. Imagine the horror of waking to the sharp teeth of a rat tearing at your very flesh. Will Bird endured this constant torment, his nerves frayed by the scratching sounds echoing in the dark. Every moment was a battle against the elements, the pests, and a creeping shadow of shell shock. Was the trench itself becoming a massive hallucination born from the depths of extreme physical suffering? The constant threat of an enemy attack meant that true rest was nothing but a distant memory. In this state of total exhaustion, the brain begins to search for patterns in the empty darkness. Will's reality was crumbling, leaving him vulnerable to whatever spectral sightings might be lurking in the mist. He was a man pushed to the absolute limit, standing on the edge of a spiritual precipice. The mud seemed to pull at his boots like the hands of those already claimed by the earth. No man's land lay just beyond the parapet, a silent witness to the misery of the living. Will watched the rats thrive while his fellow soldiers withered under the weight of the endless war. His mind was a tinderbox of fatigue, waiting for a single spark to ignite a supernatural vision. In this fragile state, the distinction between the living and the dead grew perilously thin. But are these spectral sightings merely the desperate inventions of minds pushed to their breaking point? To understand this mystery, we must examine the grueling physical limits of those serving in the Great War. Historians have spent decades trying to bridge the gap between supernatural claims and the harsh military reality. One prominent researcher, Tim Cook, has dedicated 20 years to uncovering the truth within personal wartime records. He meticulously combed through thousands of private diaries, searching for the honest thoughts of exhausted frontline soldiers. Within these fragile letters and memoirs, a pattern of psychological endurance and profound suffering began to emerge. Life inside the dark Great War dugout was a relentless assault on the human senses and the spirit. Above them, the lethal expanse of no man's land served as a constant reminder of their mortality. Deep below, tunneling companies worked in suffocating silence, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of collapse. For the average soldier, the most persistent and punishing enemy was the total lack of restorative sleep. This chronic sleep deprivation pushed men into a waking haze where the boundaries of the world blurred. Even in rare moments of rest, the environment offered no true sanctuary from the horrors of the front. Massive rats scurried through the mud, bold enough to nip at the heels of sleeping, exhausted men. These vermin did not just target the soldiers. They relentlessly tore into the meager rations meant for survival. Imagine the mental strain of living in a hole while rats chewed your boots and your food. Under such extreme conditions, the mind begins to fracture, creating vivid premonitions of impending and certain doom. Is it any wonder that shell shock and spectral encounters became frequent themes in their private writings? Tim Cook's decades of research suggest that the supernatural was a functional reality for the broken. These men were not just fighting an enemy, they were battling the complete disintegration of their own psyche. The physical torment of the trenches created a fertile ground for the ghosts that haunted their weary minds. Will didn't just watch the figure. He stood up, grabbed his gear, and followed it into the labyrinth. Commanded by a dead man, Will Bird began a journey through the dark, winding Great War trenches. Every step felt like a heavy dream as the spectral sighting led him deeper into the muddy maze. If you were in Will's boots, would you have followed a phantom through the freezing no man's land? The figure of his brother Steve moved with an uncanny grace, never once looking back at the living. Following a ghost through a trench is like following a flickering candle through a raging midnight storm. The walls of the dugout seemed to groan with the weight of the war as they pushed forward. Will navigated the network, his breath misting in the air, desperate to keep the apparition in his sight. He scrambled over debris and through narrow passages, driven by a force that defied all military logic. This wasn't just shell shock. It was a visceral pull toward a man he knew was gone. Through the deep, narrow paths, the two brothers moved in a silent and hauntingly rhythmic procession. Where was Steve leading him? And what lay beyond the next bend of this lightless subterranean world? Will Bird follow the figure through a network of trenches, ignoring the exhaustion deep in his bones? The distant rumble of artillery felt miles away as the silence of the ghost consumed his entire reality. Shadows danced against the wet clay walls, blurring the line between the physical world and the spectral. Every corner turned brought a new fear, yet the presence of his brother provided a strange, chilling comfort. Suddenly, the figure of Steve Bird disappeared in an empty trench, vanishing like mist in the wind. Will reached out into the void, but there was nothing left of the man who had guided him. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, Steve was gone, leaving Will alone in a place he didn't recognize. He stood in a section of the line that felt unfamiliar, far from his original post and companions. Overcome by a sudden, heavy fatigue, Will Bird fell asleep in the trench where the figure disappeared. The ghost had delivered him to a new destination, leaving the weary soldier to the mercy of sleep. While Will Bird followed a guardian brother, others followed a figure that stood out like a bruise. Not every vision in the Great War brought comfort. Some brought an unmistakable sense of dread. Just hours earlier, British soldiers had successfully taken a town after a fierce, chaotic storm of fire. The smoke of battle still hung heavy over the ruins when two soldiers noticed something impossible. In the middle of the shell-scarred landscape, a woman appeared, walking calmly through the wreckage. She wore a vibrant blue skirt that seemed to defy the gray, muddy reality of the trenches. Atop her head sat a simple bonnet, a piece of civilian life lost in a military nightmare. How could any woman in such attire survive a town that had just been taken by storm? Why did she move with such intentionality through the jagged wire and cratered earth of no man's land? To the weary soldiers, she was a sudden splash of bright paint on a burnt and blackened canvas. The air grew cold as they watched her, a spectral sighting that chilled their blood more than shell shock. The British soldiers stood frozen, unable to look away from the surreal figure gliding across the battlefield. One of the men, a soldier named Tommy, suddenly gasped as recognition washed over his pale face. With a trembling voice, Tommy claimed the woman in the vibrant blue skirt was actually his mother. This was no guardian angel. It was a premonition that felt like a cold hand on a heart. Unlike the warmth Will Bird felt, this encounter was heavy with the weight of an approaching tragedy. They watched her move from a dugout's edge, a silent witness to the horrors surrounding her. No one else seemed to notice the civilian presence amidst the chaos of the advancing tunneling companies. Her presence signaled a darker fate, a warning that some visions were harbingers of the end. She wore a vibrant blue skirt, a color that truly had no place in the world of the dead. Why did some spectral sightings offer salvation while others only whispered of impending doom? In the mud of the Great War, the line between life and death often blurred. Two figures emerged from the fog, each carrying a different message for the weary soldiers. One was a brother returned from the grave, while the other was a haunting maternal vision. These encounters forced men to question if they were being saved or merely marked for death. Will Bird's experience with his brother Steve offered a rare, physical comfort amidst the carnage. When the spirit reached out, Will noted that his brother's hand felt remarkably, impossibly warm. This wasn't a cold, distant ghost, but a presence that felt solid and truly alive. Steve looked at his brother and gave a command that would change everything that night. He told Will to get his gear and follow him immediately into the dark. By obeying this spectral brother, Will escaped a dugout that soon became a mass grave. His survival turned a ghost story into a testament of protective love from beyond the veil. Yet, in another part of the line, a very different figure haunted the British ranks. Two British soldiers watched in disbelief as a woman in a vibrant blue skirt appeared. She wore a delicate bonnet, looking entirely out of place in the shell-scarred no man's land. For a soldier named Tommy, this wasn't just any ghost. He claimed she was his mother, while Steve Bird led his brother to safety. This woman seemed to beckon toward the end. Her presence didn't offer a way out, but rather a final, chilling comfort before the strike. Tommy's recognition of her suggested a deeply personal connection to the supernatural world. Was she a guardian, or a premonition of the tragedy about to unfold on the battlefield? These contrasting visions highlight the psychological complexity of men pushed to their absolute limits. Some historians suggest shell shock created these vivid hallucinations to cope with the surrounding horror. Yet, the physical warmth of a hand or shared sighting suggests something far more mysterious. Tunneling companies and infantrymen alike reported these strange occurrences across the vast Western Front. We are left to wonder why some spirits acted as guardians while others acted as omens. Did the spirit of Steve Bird possess a strength that the woman in blue did not? Or was the fate of every soldier already written in the blood-soaked soil of France? The Great War remains a landscape where the paranormal and the historical are ever entwined. These spectral sightings continue to challenge our understanding of the human mind under extreme pressure. Whether visions of hope or warnings of death, they remain a haunting legacy of the trenches. The morning sun rose over the Great War, revealing a reality that chilled Will to the bone. The morning light finally pulled back the veil, exposing the true purpose of his spectral midnight visitor. Will trekked back toward the place he had slept, expecting to find his comrades waiting for him. Instead of a familiar entrance, he found only a massive crater where his dugout once stood. A heavy enemy shell had struck with pinpoint precision, completely obliterating the underground shelter in an instant. Dust and smoke hung in the air where men had once shared stories and meager rations. He realized with a sinking heart that there were no survivors among those he left behind. Is survival sometimes just a matter of who is watching over you from the other side? If he hadn't followed that ghostly hand, Will would have been buried alive beneath the mud. His narrow escape felt like a fragile thread, keeping the rest of his life from unraveling. Standing at the edge of the ruin, the weight of his survival pressed heavily upon his chest. How do you live the rest of your life knowing you were handpicked to survive? The spectral sightings he once questioned now felt like a profound and terrifying gift of life. Amidst the chaos of no man's land, a brother's premonitions had defied the logic of war. While others might dismiss such visions as shell shock, Will knew the truth was far deeper. He walked away from the wreckage, a man forever changed by a touch he couldn't explain. Will Bird survived the Great War, carrying the memory of that warm, ghostly hand for decades. The years passed, but the silence of the trenches continued to echo in his quietest moments. In 1968, 50 years after the guns fell silent, he finally sat down to write. He titled his incredible memoir Ghosts Have Warm Hands, a testament to his impossible survival. His words offered a window into the supernatural mysteries that dwelled within the dark trenches. He wanted the world to understand that some shadows in the war were there to save. He never forgot the radiating heat of his brother's grip against his own frozen skin. 50 years later, he finally told the world why he believed ghosts have warm hands. Premonitions are often dismissed as nerves, but Albert Davy knew exactly when his clock would stop. Will Bird was given a second chance, but Corporal Albert Davy received a final, chilling warning. Amidst the chaos of the Great War, some men developed a sixth sense for impending doom. Inside the 1st Australian Tunneling Company, the atmosphere grew heavy as Zero Hour steadily approached. Corporal Albert Davy was a man of the earth, accustomed to the deep silence of the tunnels. His commanding officer, Captain Oliver Holmes Woodward, watched his men with a keen, experienced eye. One morning, Davy approached Woodward with a look that transcended the simple fear of battle. He held his personal belongings tightly, small treasures of a life lived far from the mud. Davy asked Captain Woodward to post these final items home to his beloved wife. There was no hesitation in his voice, only the flat certainty of a man already gone. A premonition is a shadow cast by an event before it arrives in the physical world. Woodward had seen many brave men, but this quiet resignation chilled him to the bone. Outside the dugout, the air hummed with the electric tension of a looming, massive offensive. The men waited in the trenches, their faces masks of grime and shared, unspoken anxiety. Beyond the trench, no man's land lay waiting, a scarred landscape of wire and hidden death. Suddenly, the rhythm of the battlefield shifted as a single shell screamed through the morning sky. It struck with pinpoint accuracy, turning the temporary safety of the trench into a chaotic inferno. When the smoke cleared, the terrible prophecy of Albert Davy had been tragically fulfilled. The corporal was killed instantly by that shell while waiting for the final whistle to blow. Was it a premonition, or us the math of survival finally running out for him? Captain Woodward now held the heavy responsibility of a promise made to a dead man. In the Great War, these spectral sightings served as the only maps in a world gone mad. We may never understand how Davy knew his time was up before the shell was fired. While many suffered shell shock, Davy's clarity suggested a connection to something far more mysterious. He didn't ask for help. He just asked that his things be sent home to his wife. How could a commander react when a soldier calmly predicts his own death in the Great War? Captain Oliver Holmes Woodward led the 1st Australian Tunneling Company through the darkest corners of the front. Deep inside a cramped dugout, the weight of the war pressed heavily upon every weary soul. Woodward was no stranger to the hollow eyes and trembling hands caused by relentless shell shock. Yet, Albert Davy approached his commanding officer with a calm that felt strangely out of place. He did not ask for a reprieve from the looming battle or seek safety from the coming storm. Instead, Davy simply handed over his personal belongings, asking Woodward to post them to his wife. Such premonitions were common in the trenches, but this request carried a heavy, undeniable sense of finality. Woodward looked into the man's eyes, seeing a certainty that defied the logic of the modern world. To the tunneling companies, the Earth itself often whispered secrets that the surface world could never hear. Woodward accepted the package, perhaps hoping the soldiers' chilling premonition would prove to be merely nerves. The atmosphere grew thick as the men prepared for the inevitable arrival of the dreaded 0 hour. No man's land waited silently beyond the parapet, a graveyard already hungry for fresh souls to claim. Suddenly, the screaming whistle of incoming artillery shattered the tense silence of the Australian lines. A single shell found its mark, exploding with a violent force that shook the very foundations of reality. When the smoke cleared, the grim reality of Davy's prediction was laid bare before his horrified commander. Albert Davy had been killed instantly, just as he had foreseen moments before the barrage began. For Woodward, witnessing such a precise spectral sighting of fate left a scar on his military mind. It was one thing to hear rumors of ghosts, but another to watch a premonition come true. The commander stood alone, holding the belongings of a man who knew his time had finally expired. This encounter forced Woodward to confront the inexplicable forces lurking within the shadows of the Great War. How many other men walked toward their end with such terrifying and absolute clarity of spirit? The chilling accuracy of Davy's final request would haunt the captain long after the guns fell silent. In the trenches, the line between the living and the dead often seemed thin as a veil. Woodward's testimony serves as a haunting reminder that some truths are felt long before they are seen. If these stories were just dreams, why do they still haunt us 100 years later? The guns have been silent for over a century, but the echoes of these encounters remain. Over 100 years have passed since the Great War officially fell into the history books. Yet, the stories of spectral sightings still linger like a morning mist over the old front. From the deepest dugout to the shattered remains of no man's land, these mysteries endure. We often look back at the tunneling companies and the crushing darkness they endured beneath the earth. We wonder if the shadows they saw were products of shell shock or something truly divine. These supernatural testimonies remain as a fragile glimpse into what soldiers saw beyond death's veil. Were these premonitions merely the desperate cries of minds pushed to their absolute breaking point? Or did the Great War thin the barrier between our world and the terrifying great unknown? These stories are the ghosts of the Great War, still seeking an audience in our modern world. Each account serves as a haunting reminder of the psychological toll taken on every young soul. The mud has dried and the trenches have filled, but the voices still whisper through time. We may never truly understand the visions that guided men like Woodward to safety. We cannot easily explain why Albert Davy knew his final hour was fast approaching. These accounts offer a bridge to a generation that faced horrors we can barely imagine today. History records the movements of armies, but these stories capture the secrets of the human spirit. They stand as a final testament to the resilience of those who walked through the fire. Perhaps the truth isn't in what they saw, but in the fact they felt the need to tell us. Are some mysteries better left unsolved in the quiet fog of the long-forgotten past? What else is waiting in the fog of history, hidden from the light of our understanding? As we look back, we must decide if we are finally ready to listen to the shadows. Our journey through the supernatural was guided by the expertise of a true friend of the channel. This deep dive into Great War shadows was made possible by someone who knows these battlefields intimately. We are truly honored to have Jake Howard serving as the guest writer for this haunting episode. Jake brings a unique narrative perspective, currently working within the professional film industry based in Toronto. Within the cinematic world, he is a distinguished expert on historical weapons and military uniforms. His specialized knowledge ensures that every detail of the Great War feels grounded in historical reality. You might find yourself wondering how history and the film industry collide to create such vivid stories. To Jake, good history is like a well-crafted film where every tiny, specific detail truly matters. Many of you may already recognize his chilling work on our previous The Hound of Min's episode. That exploration of wartime legends helped pave the way for the spectral sightings we examine today. Beyond his contributions to the screen, Jake is also the accomplished author of One Day Over Germany. This book offers a deeper look into the harrowing experiences of those who fought through the war. We highly recommend picking up his work if you wish to dive further into these historic mysteries. What other forgotten stories remain hidden within the dusty uniforms and rusted weapons of the past? By supporting historians like Jake, we ensure that these voices from the trenches are never forgotten. Please check out his writing to help keep this vital history alive for the next generation. We want to extend a sincere thank you to Jake Howard for sharing his incredible expertise. Thank you for watching and exploring these lingering echoes of the Great War with us today. Stay curious as we continue to peel back the veil on the world's most mysterious historical events. Until next time, remember that the shadows of the past often have the most important stories.